So the other day I was on Twitter and I saw this person saying there's this massive project to show how racist the average Redditor is called r/where I'd live. So I go there and it's basically just people posting maps where they've ranked different places based on how much they'd like to live there. And I thought, seriously? People think it's racist just to prefer to live in some places over other places? But I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind throwing together a little map of where I'd like to live. So I did, and since I have a YouTube audience, I posted it as a community post. And what I found out is that people getting offended by where someone else wants to live is apparently a specific type of neuroses present in my own community. Indeed, that map was seemingly my most controversial post of all time, bringing up a whole load of objections people had in the comments, so I thought I would address some of them. Because it wasn't just people saying, I personally like living in this place, so it doesn't really make sense to me why you wouldn't want to live there. It was people calling me stupid and a bigot. One thing that I did say was a priority that lots of people seem to ignore was where I'd live would have to be close to lots of other places worth visiting, and that excludes the vast majority of the planet. See, a lot of people were offended by me putting Australia in D tier, but really, the more I think about it, it arguably should be an F tier. Most of human civilization worth experiencing is found in Europe, so if you live in Australia, you now have to travel for a whole day just in one direction, never mind getting back. Even Southeast Asia, which is quite worth visiting, is still a long way from the most populated southeastern part of Australia. To me, the main benefit of living anywhere is that you have the option to travel to other very different places. Travel 100 miles in Europe and you could find yourself in a place with a completely different culture, history, language, food, architecture. In Australia, you travel 1,000 miles and you're still just in Australia. Not even a particularly different part of Australia, certainly not different enough to be worth traveling 1,000 miles for. So yeah, this map makes a lot more sense if you understand it as a where I'd like to live as someone interested in taking lots of vacations to diverse, culturally interesting countries map. That's why literally the only places above D tier are in Europe, East Asia, or Canada, because based on the curvature of the Earth, it's not actually that long to get from Canada to Europe, although it's still a long haul flight, so arguably Canada should be knocked down to D tier. East Asia has the second most cultural diversity after Europe, and that's why a lot of East Asian countries are ranked quite highly. I don't have that much interest in the four remaining monolithic cultures of Latin America, Africa, Arabia, and discount Anglosphere. Sorry. It's also interesting, people didn't consider the fact that maybe I really hate flying. Which I do. I hate flying a lot. So Australians who got super upset about why a British guy wouldn't want to live a day's worth of flying away from the rest of his family were, I think, exposing an inability to consider that other people might have very different priorities from them. Especially a lot of people from Australia and America were very upset to see that China ranked above them, so I guess I should explain that. I am definitely a Sinophile. I like Chinese culture, I like Chinese movies, I like Chinese history, I like Chinese food, that authentic sticky chili beef that Qin Shi Huang would have dined upon. I am far more of a Sinophile than I am a weeaboo, even though Japan does rank higher than China, but that's just based on the fact it is objectively better in terms of quality of life. But yeah, in terms of living in China, I feel like whether you're living in one of those quaint little ornate Chinese villages or one of those rapidly expanding urban areas where they're building like 2 meters of new metro a day, what's not to love? The two main objections people presented was, first of all, a concern about human rights. Personally, I'm a bit skeptical of human rights accusations leveled against geopolitical rivals of the West. And honestly, I don't feel that free in the UK. In fact, frankly, I don't think there's anywhere in the world that I would feel free. I would always feel like I couldn't fully speak my mind if that went against the interests of the establishment. At least in China, I'd have the benefit of not feeling any need to criticize their government because it doesn't really have anything to do with me. With the British government, I'm British. It's my government, so I feel the need to criticize it. I'd happily just enjoy living in China, look the other way at all the human rights abuses if they're happening because they've got nothing to do with me, and I could just have a peaceful, happy life where I don't rock the boat. The other thing people brought up is I'm a Christian, and doesn't China make it hard for Christians? Well, actually, China possibly has more Christians than any other country on earth, and the majority of them are evangelical Christians who take the Bible seriously. I actually believe that within my lifetime, China will become the global superpower, majority Christian, and will do more to push evangelical Christianity and the gospel than any other country in history. But people might say, well, isn't the message of Christianity curtailed by the Chinese state? Isn't that bad? As far as I can tell, you just can't use Christianity to push a revolutionary anti-establishment, anti-government agenda, but that was never what Christianity was supposed to be about in the first place. Christianity is about preaching the gospel that leads to salvation for every man, and I've not seen any evidence that type of preaching is illegal in China. I should also say that a few years ago there was this job that I desperately wanted that possibly would have ended up with me moving to China. It was an academic job studying the economic impact of China in the West. I envisioned it potentially leading to me being able to move to China, and I thought that would be a lot of fun. And when I didn't get the job, I was really upset, like full-on paralyzed levels of depression. So yeah, based on that, I almost find myself thinking China should maybe rank even higher. On the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of my American fans were upset to find out I have very little interest at all in living in the US. My wife is American, there was a possibility we might end up settling in America, and obviously all of my in-laws live in America, and it seems tolerable. But honestly, nowadays, the idea of living in America seems staggeringly unappealing to me, like totally intolerable in basically every sense. Firstly, cars. I was complaining to my in-laws about the fact that it's now a 30-minute drive for us to get to church because our church is in the next town over. Their church is in the same city and it's a 40-minute drive. So from their perspective, me complaining about this 30-minute drive must have seemed ridiculous. Any time I've been driven anywhere in America, it has been an utterly soul-crushing experience. So many traffic lights, so much time just wasted in standstill traffic. There is a distinct possibility I could drive the 35 minutes from this house to my parents' house and never need to stop once. Even as it is, I need to stop only a handful of times, and that's just for a few seconds. But in America, at every single intersection, there is the strong probability of having to wait at a red light for what feels like several minutes. My sister-in-law was driving us somewhere in Florida, and at this one red light, we had an entire conversation about how I came to faith, and then an entire separate conversation about how she came to faith, all before the red light changed. And then of course the streets are totally lifeless, there's nobody walking on them, there's no interesting scenery, it's just totally bland and boring and depressing. The fact that traveling from one place to another in America is so boring and tedious is awful when combined with just how depressed and isolated you feel when you are staying in just one place. In terms of just the basic sensation of existing, the best day in America is like the worst day in the UK. My most boring, typical journey where I live right now is still marked by old churches, quaint villages, antique bridges, rolling hills, ancient forests, so much history and a diversity of history in such a small amount of movement. By the way, this is another reason why I should probably rank Canada lower, because in terms of living there, Canada is basically identical to the United States, maybe even slightly worse. I can certainly say that all of my most pleasant experiences in North America have been in the United States, while all of my experiences in Canada have been Now, I will say there are some small towns in America and Canada that actually do feel quite nice. They have like busy high streets, people are actually walking around, you feel like you're part of a community. The problem is that community itself feels quite isolated from the rest of the country. Canada's actually a perfect way of proving this point, because I have been to some small towns in Ontario that have actually been quite nice. I actually liked being there. But from those small towns to even get to the next small town involves just a 30-minute drive along a totally straight road with boring farmland, no character, no scenery, nothing either side of you the entire way. And to get to a major city where there's a lot more amenities, a lot more things you might want, a lot more friends and stuff like that, that's going to be at least an hour's drive away. In England, I get the same experience that feels uniquely quaint and pleasant from a small town in Canada, just from being in the suburbs of a major city. I was also going to complain about American political culture, but I don't want to overburden this video with excessive grievances. You know, just armed agents of the state walking around seems authoritarian to me. The things those armed agents seem to be able to get away with really bothers me, and the fact that despite all of that going on, Americans still insist that they are the freest country in the world, I don't know if I'd be able to tolerate that level of delusion surrounding me at all times. I guess the other thing to bear in mind is that this map, I threw it together on a whim. Like, I didn't think about it in a whole load of detail. As such, the fact that Russia ranks equivalent to Finland and Poland, yeah, that was kind of stupid, because if one of my priorities is being able to travel, I think recent events mean it's quite difficult to travel from Russia. My logic was that things like the overall political regime and culture are things I should consider long-term, but something like a war, that's more temporary. Eventually it's going to be resolved, and at that point, relations should normalize a bit more. But yeah, at the same time, one reason why the countries that border Russia are ranked quite low is because as a British citizen, something that really annoys me is our war hawk media pushing this myth that Russia presents a threat to us. It annoys me so much that the media is constantly trying to manipulate us into accepting going off to the other side of the continent to go die in a war that has nothing to do with us. As such, living in a country where Russia actually is a threat, that would annoy me, because that whole claim of Russia being a threat is something that annoys me right now. So to live in a place where that's actually true and I have to take it seriously, no thanks. It's also kind of dumb that I ranked Portugal so highly. I did this because the Anglo-Portuguese alliance is the oldest still active alliance in history, and I think that's really cool. I like to always show some respect to Portugal, be friendly to them, so I rank them higher based on that. However, this isn't about my overall positive opinions of a country. This is about where would I want to live, and I think ranking Portugal high based on a military alliance between the two countries doesn't make much sense. In general, my Britishness motivated me to give bonus points to every former British colony, and that's something you can especially see in the case of Africa. But honestly, I don't really know if there's any logic to that. You know, just because somewhere's a former British colony, that doesn't mean I would like living there. I mean, to be fair, most of the places where I did this, I still overall ranked them pretty low. It's also not really logical that I ranked Nepal and Bhutan higher than surrounding countries. The reason why I did that is because I like the idea of living in this serene temple in the mountains and just having this quiet, meditative life. But Nepal has very strict rules against preaching the gospel. I believe Bhutan does too, so they wouldn't be good places to be Christian at all. I guess one final question is, should I have rated the rest of Europe higher? I mean, obviously it fits with my travel concerns. They have pretty good economies, pretty good human rights records. What's not to love? This isn't going to be easy to say, but the main issue I have with much of the rest of Europe is relevance. Is there anything wrong with Belgium? No, but who cares about Belgium? Hanging over all of this is the fact that I love the UK, and I don't think there's anything greater I could take from my children than the right to call themselves British, a child of the greatest country God has ever created. A tiny little island that conquered the world, spread liberty, democracy, prosperity, the gospel to so much of it. The origin of the lingua franca of the globe, and also that produced much of the popular culture that people across the globe all value. I like being able to proudly tell people I'm British. It's something that I wish the entire world could have access to, and I do believe that anyone in the world who loves Britain, recognizes Britain as the greatest country in the world, they can claim to be spiritually British. I would welcome them saying that. The highest tier, the S tier, is represented by the dark green, and that includes only Britain. And the difference between the dark green and even the light green, between S tier and A tier, is orders of magnitude greater than the difference between any other tier on this map. I could stress this point more, but yeah, the big takeaway is, as much as I do have issues with the UK, there isn't really any other country on the globe that I would actually seriously consider living in as an alternative. With this said, I did think maybe I should have another crack at this map and consider more the rankings and maybe be a little bit more generous, but also knock a few things down. In Europe, I've decided to add a few more greens because I would actually quite like to live in northern Italy. Having spent some time there, I really enjoyed it. Most of the rest of Europe stays at C tier, and I've bumped up a few of Russia's neighbours while knocking Russia down to never, because the war. I'm still going to knock down most of the Islamic world with the exception of the UAE, because what if I get really rich and I don't want to pay income tax and I like slavery? I've actually decided to bump India up to D tier while knocking down all the surrounding countries to F, because actually it seems like it's easier to be a practicing Christian in India than most other places. And again, most of East Asia I'd consider because it places me close to some interesting places. I do have half a mind to knock Australia down to F tier because it really would be so incredibly annoying to be totally separate from the rest of the world, but I'll keep it as D tier because it wouldn't be so bad if I ever became a millionaire and could just fly first class all the time. And despite me saying the whole Commonwealth system really didn't make much sense, I'd feel weird painting all of Africa as red, so I'll stick with that. And that's it, that's my new map. I trust there are no objections. Good.